Yul Brynner had been practicing his 20 hundredths of a second draw in the scorching Arizona desert for 3 consecutive hours when Dean Martin appeared at the edge of the old Tucson practice range carrying a crystal martini glass and moving like a man who had never encountered an emergency in his entire life, completely unaware that he was about to demonstrate why the most lethal speed often came disguised as supreme indifference to urgency. Summer 1965. Old Tucson Studios, 114 degrees in the merciless Sonoran sun, and Hollywood's most relaxed entertainer was about to teach one of cinema's most intense performers that true mastery sometimes whispered instead of roaring. If you're fascinated by untold stories of Yul Brynner's most shocking encounters with hidden deadly capabilities, subscribe to Yul Brynner Untold Legacy for more moments where casual appearances concealed lethal precision. The 48-year-old Martin approached the shooting area with his characteristic slouch, his impeccably tailored Western costume somehow maintaining its crisp lines, despite desert conditions that were reducing everyone else to wilted approximations of their morning selves. Everything about his demeanor radiated the supreme confidence of a man who had discovered that life's most serious challenges could be met with the right combination of charm, alcohol, and studied indifference to anything requiring visible effort. His famous smile played at the corners of his mouth as he watched Yul complete another flawless demonstration of technical precision, the 44-year-old performer moving through his routine with the mechanical perfection that had made him Hollywood's gold standard for Western authenticity. Each draw was identical to the last, exactly 20 hundredths of a second from leather to firing position, executed with the kind of disciplined repetition that separated professionals from pretenders. "Very impressive, pal," Martin said conversationally, taking a leisurely sip from his martini, while somehow managing to keep the glass level despite the uneven desert ground beneath his feet. "Very technical, very serious." The way he emphasized "serious" carried just enough gentle mockery to suggest that he found Yul's intense approach to what was, ultimately, entertainment work, somewhat amusing. Like watching someone practice proper fork technique for eating birthday cake, Yul holstered his custom Colt single-action army and turned to study the man who had somehow managed to become one of Hollywood's biggest stars while appearing to care about nothing more challenging than the quality of his next cocktail. Everything about Martin's posture suggested casual indifference to the demanding physical work that Western films required, but something in his eyes hinted at depths that his carefully constructed public persona worked overtime to conceal. "Dean," Yul said with professional courtesy, though his tone carried a slight edge that suggested Martin's relaxed attitude towards serious preparation was beginning to test his patience. "I wasn't expecting to see you on set today." "Just passing through," Martin replied, finishing his cigarette with languid precision before crushing it under his boot heel. "Heard there was some world-class gun work happening out here in the desert. Thought I'd take a look at how the professionals handle their craft." He gestured toward the target that Yul had been using for practice, its center completely obliterated by hundreds of precisely placed shots delivered over the course of his extended training session. The cardboard had been reduced to tatters, testament to hours of disciplined repetition and technical refinement. "That's some fine shooting," Martin continued, his voice carrying that same casual tone that he used to discuss everything from movie contracts to dinner reservations. "Real textbook stuff, very by the numbers, very predictable." The last word carried a subtle challenge that created tension in the desert air, having nothing to do with the oppressive temperature. Martin's seemingly casual dismissal of hours of disciplined practice suggested that he viewed Yul's approach as somehow lacking in spontaneity or natural flair. "Technical precision serves its purpose," Yul replied, his accented voice carrying the controlled authority that had made him one of cinema's most commanding presences. "When accuracy matters, when timing is crucial, there's no substitute for disciplined preparation and systematic training." Martin's smile widened slightly, but something shifted in his posture. Not enough for casual observers to notice, but sufficient for someone with Yul's trained attention to realize that Dean Martin was not quite as indifferent to the conversation as his manner suggested. "Disciplined preparation," Martin mused, setting his martini glass on a nearby equipment case with the careful precision of someone who never wanted to waste good alcohol. That's a heavy way to think about movie work, don't you think? I mean, we're just entertainers here, making pictures for people who want to forget their troubles for a couple hours. The words carried a philosophical challenge that was all the more pointed for being delivered with such relaxed ease. Martin was suggesting that Yul's intensity was unnecessarily dramatic for what was, when you stripped away the mythology, just another form of commercial entertainment designed to sell tickets. "Some of us bring different experiences to our work," Yul replied, his voice dropping to the quiet tone that those who knew him had learned to recognize as potentially dangerous. "Some of us understand that the techniques we use for entertainment have roots in circumstances where entertainment was not the primary consideration." Martin nodded thoughtfully, as if genuinely considering this perspective for the first time in his career. "Makes perfect sense," he said finally. "Different backgrounds, different approaches to the same basic job. Nothing wrong with taking your work seriously." He moved closer to Yul's practice area, his movements still carrying that same lazy grace that characterized everything he did, but something in his bearing suggested that the conversation was about to shift into territory that neither man had originally intended to explore when it began. "Mind if I try a few rounds?" Martin asked, his tone suggesting he was requesting permission to play with someone else's expensive toys, rather than challenging one of Hollywood's most formidable screen presences to a demonstration of comparative skill. Yul studied Martin with increased attention, recognizing something in the casual request that went beyond simple curiosity about unfamiliar equipment. "Of course, though you should understand that the weapon has been extensively modified. Custom trigger work, adjusted balance, professional tuning. It requires a different approach than standard studio equipment." Martin picked up the Colt with the same effortless ease he brought to everything else in his life, but his handling of the firearm immediately revealed something that his relaxed demeanor had successfully concealed from casual observation. His grip was textbook perfect, his stance naturally balanced, his familiarity with the weapon complete and unconscious. "Beautiful piece," Martin said, testing the weapon's balance with subtle movements that suggested extensive experience with serious firearms. "Custom trigger work, modified grip angle, professionally weighted. Someone who really knows what they're doing set this up for precision work." He looked at Yul with new respect that seemed to emerge from nowhere. "This isn't standard studio equipment, is it? This is real working hardware designed for actual performance." "I prefer authenticity in my preparation," Yul replied, now studying Martin with considerably increased interest. The casual entertainer's immediate and accurate assessment of the weapon's modifications had revealed knowledge that went far beyond what most actors possessed about their professional tools. "Fair enough," Martin said, moving to the firing position with movements that suddenly seemed less casual and more purposeful than anything he had done since arriving at the practice area. "Let's see what this old song and dance man can accomplish with some serious hardware." What happened next fundamentally challenged everything Yul thought he understood about the relationship between attitude and capability. Martin's hand moved toward his holster with the same languid grace that characterized all his movements, creating the visual impression that he was approaching the demonstration with the same casual indifference he brought to everything else. But the speed that followed was so unexpected, so devastating, and so perfectly controlled, that Yul actually took an involuntary step backward in pure shock. The Colt appeared in Martin's hand faster than conscious thought, faster than normal perception could track, faster than should have been humanly possible, from someone whose entire public persona was built around supreme indifference to anything requiring effort or urgency. The weapon materialized in perfect firing position as if it had teleported there, bypassing the normal relationship between intention and physical action entirely. 19/100ths of a second, called out Miguel Santos, the timekeeper, his voice carrying the same stunned amazement that had marked his encounters with seemingly impossible human capabilities. "Sweet Jesus, Mr. Martin. 19/100ths. That's faster than anything I've ever timed on any set anywhere." The silence that followed was profound and absolute. Yul, who had spent years perfecting his own considerable speed through disciplined training and systematic practice, found himself confronting someone whose capabilities exceeded his own while being delivered with such casual ease that it seemed like an insult to the very concept of preparation and professional dedication. "Not terrible for an old crooner," Martin said, holstering the weapon with the same impossible speed he had used to draw it, his tone remaining conversational as if he had just completed some trivial parlor trick rather than demonstrated speed that challenged the limits of human capability. But something in his eyes suggested that he was completely aware of the impact his demonstration had created, and that his casual dismissal of his own performance was as carefully calculated as everything else about his public presentation. Yul remained silent for several long moments, processing what he had just witnessed while struggling to reconcile the evidence of his own eyes with everything he thought he knew about Dean Martin's character and background. "How?" he asked finally, the single word carrying all his confusion and professional curiosity. Martin retrieved his martini glass and took a contemplative sip before responding, his movements once again carrying that deceptive casualness that now seemed like masterful acting rather than natural indifference to serious matters. "Same way you learned, I suspect," Martin said thoughtfully. "Necessity. Just different circumstances than yours. Different requirements. Different consequences for failure." He looked out across the desert landscape, his expression taking on a distant quality that suggested memories he rarely shared with anyone, even close friends who thought they knew everything about his background and experience. Before the singing, before the movies, before all this Hollywood glamour, Martin gestured vaguely at the elaborate film set surrounding them. There were other ways to make a living. Harder ways. More dangerous ways. Ways that required different skills than entertaining people in nightclubs and movie theaters. The revelation hung in the superheated desert air like a confession that explained everything about the carefully constructed public persona that had made Dean Martin one of America's most beloved entertainers. "You think because I make everything look easy, because I keep things light and casual, that means I don't understand what real speed actually means in serious situations?" Martin continued, his voice carrying a new note of gravity that his public never heard. "But some of us learned early that the best way to survive dangerous circumstances is to make sure nobody realizes how dangerous you actually are until it's too late for them to adjust their calculations." Yul nodded slowly, understanding beginning to replace his initial shock and confusion. The relaxed demeanor is operational camouflage. "The very best kind," Martin agreed readily. "People see exactly what they expect to see. They see someone who drinks too much, someone who doesn't take anything seriously, someone who couldn't possibly represent a genuine threat to anyone. They don't see someone who might be lethal until the moment when that recognition becomes academic rather than actionable." He finished his martini and set the glass aside with the same careful precision he had demonstrated while handling the modified firearm, every movement economical and purposeful, despite appearing casual to outside observation. "Your approach is honest and straightforward," Martin continued, studying Yul with new appreciation. "You let people know exactly how capable and dangerous you are. That works perfectly when you're playing characters who need to project authority and command immediate respect. But in certain real-life situations, sometimes it's strategically superior to let people underestimate your capabilities until circumstances require revelation." The two men stood together in the blazing desert heat, each representing a fundamentally different philosophy of strength, preparation, and tactical presentation. Yul's intensity was visible, announced, designed to command immediate respect and discourage potential challenges. Martin's capability was concealed, disguised, revealed only when circumstances absolutely demanded demonstration. "Different tools serving different strategic purposes," Yul observed thoughtfully. "Exactly right," Martin replied with obvious satisfaction at being understood. "You learned to be fast in circumstances where displaying speed was obviously necessary and strategically advantageous. I learned to be fast in circumstances where appearing fast would have gotten me killed before I could use the capability effectively." Years later, when asked about his most surprising encounter with hidden talent, Yul would describe that afternoon in Arizona as educational in ways he had never anticipated. "I learned that the most dangerous people are often those who appear least dangerous. and that true mastery sometimes requires concealing your capabilities rather than displaying them prominently. Dean Martin, characteristically, never spoke publicly about his firearms capabilities, maintaining the carefully constructed image of casual indifference that had served him so effectively throughout his entertainment career.